Hello class, this is Demetrius Wilson with Business Law. We are now on Chapter 6. We are going to discuss criminal law, and in discussing criminal law we'll also discuss civil law as well. Our learning objectives for this chapter are what two elements must exist before a person can be convicted of a crime. We'll discuss those. And can a corporation commit a crime? What are 5 broad categories of crimes, and what is a white-collar crime as opposed to what we normally think of when we think of crime, like assault? What defenses might be raised by criminal defendants to avoid liability for criminal acts, such as legal defense of insanity? What constitutional safeguards exist to protect persons accused of a crime? So we're going to understand from a defendant's perspective. And what are the basic steps in the criminal process? So this is a great chart. Actually, I believe they have it on here twice, so I'll skip the next slide. The issue in civil law, what the determination is, and also in criminal law. So we'll go from left to right. So party brings a suit, right? That's the plaintiff. The person who suffered harm in civil law, right? So in criminal law, it's the state. Right, because when you assault someone, you've done something that is against the policies and procedures of the state. But that also hurt and harmed that individual, and that's the person who suffered harm, and they would get you in civil court. The biggest case that you always see right here in California is the case of O.J. Simpson, where he got off in criminal court but did not get off in civil court. A wrongful act is causing harm to a person or a person's property, right? So, you harm me or my property, I can bring a civil suit, but you're violating a statute that prohibits some type of activity, so that's against the state. Burden of proof is preponderance of evidence, and that's on the civil side. So all the evidence says, you know what, you probably did it. We can't prove that you did it wholly, but you probably did it, and that's good enough in a civil case. But in a criminal case, you need beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict, 3/4 majority typically in a civil case, and it needs to be unanimous in a criminal case. Then the remedy, damages to compensate for the harm or decree to achieve an equitable result, right? So you're going to remedy the actual situation. So you remedy for the person, but in terms of the state, you don't necessarily remedy the state in those terms. You get punished by fine, imprisonment, or possibly even death. So like I said, this is the same slide, so we'll just pass right by that. Criminal or civil and criminal liability for the same act. So this is a good chart to kind of understand it as it goes one down the right side or one down the left side, and you understand like where they are the same and then when they kind of split off to be different. So a person who suddenly attacks Joe as he is walking down the street. So you see here a physical attack is a tort on the left side, and a physical attack is also a crime. Right, so it's a crime, and so you did something that's against society, but it also was against an individual. The assailant commits an assault, an intentional, unexcused act that creates in Joe the reasonable fear of immediate harmful contact, and a battery, intentional, harmful, or offensive contact. Right, so that's on the tort side. On the criminal side or the crime side, the assailant violates a statute that defines and prohibits the crime as assault, right? So it's the statute that you violated. Attempt to commit a violent injury on another, and battery, commission of intentional or act resulting in injury to another, right? So you see that it's a slight difference there. Joe files a civil suit against the assailant, right? So Joe is the plaintiff, files it against the defendant, who is the assailant, and then the state prosecutes against the assailant on the criminal side. And the court orders the assailant to pay Joe for his injuries, right? I had my hospital bills, pain and suffering, things of that nature. Then the court also orders the assailant to be fined or imprisoned, right? So that doesn't really affect Joe, except for, feeling good about the fact that this person is going away for this crime. But it's, that part comes from the state. So in terms of criminal liability, a person whose wrongful act may hold him liable or guilty in civil actions and criminal actions, right? So, typically, if you're guilty on the criminal side, very easy to prove that you're going to be guilty on the civil side as well. A state must show beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did these following things: performed a criminal act, actus reus. If you watch one of the videos, clearly defines what that means. These are, you'll see a lot of Latin terms in business law and law in general. While performing the act, he had the required intent, specific state of mind, mens rea, right? So your state of mind was that I'm going to go rob this bank, not that someone gave me something, I was out of my mind and I went to go rob the bank. Without the required intent, there can be no conviction. So corporate criminal liability, remember we talked about, can a corporation be held liable in a lot of situations? And the answer is yeah. Liability of the corporate entity, crimes must occur within the scope of employment. And corporations can be held criminally liable when they fail to fulfill certain statutory duties, right? If you look in that corporation, look at their paperwork, that, it's like an entity, it's like an individual, like a human being. Criminal liability of corporate officers and directors under the responsible officer doctrine, right? So, these people who are in these higher positions, they're responsible for the actions of the company, and also they're responsible for the actions of the people who work under them. Employees under their control or supervision and do not have to participate in or directly know about the criminal violation. It's the fact that you knew John had embezzled all these different places. You probably shouldn't have hired John, or you probably should have done something to remedy or rectify that situation. There are different types of crimes, of course. You have violent crimes, crimes against persons like murder or rape. Robbery is also a violent crime, right? Somebody brings a gun, sticks you up, takes your money. That's robbery. Property crime, so you have your violent crime, which is against somebody. Property crime, which is against property. Most common, it involves money or property. So burglary, right? You break into a house, steal some things. That's a property crime. Larceny, obtaining goods by false pretenses, receiving stolen goods, right? They're stolen, you're receiving them. They can prove that. You can't say, oh, well, hey, I bought them from a guy on the street, but if you know that they're stolen goods, still can get convicted in criminal court. Arson, right, setting things on fire, and then also forgery. Forgery, which a lot of people do in terms of checks, banking, and things of that nature. You have public order crime, and then white collar crime, which we spoke about. So that's a nonviolent crime, but although it's nonviolent, doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt anybody. It hurts, their pocketbook. It hurts them financially, involving a business transaction. So you have embezzlement. Knew a lady and a gentleman embezzled about $250,000 from a company. They were arrested and prosecuted. Mail and wire fraud, bribery. They have a lot of acts that ensure that people doing global business in the United States don't bribe individuals that can help them to get a substantial amount of money. But in other countries, sometimes it's normal, and I'm not. Yeah, it is actually legal, but to a certain extent, there are things that can be done. What they call greasing is everybody has to pay the certain amount to get these boxes off the dock. But certain extents like paying money to win contracts, that's bribery. Theft of trade secrets. So I broke into Auntie Anne's pretzel company, found the magic recipe and took it, and then I started making the pretzels and selling them out of my garage. And then insider trading, best example for that is Martha Stewart. So her accountant says, hey, the stock is about to tank. You should sell it all. I sell it all. Right, I make a good profit, and everybody else, is left holding the bag. That's insider trading, and yes, it's illegal. You could say it's just a tip from a friend, but it's not how it works. Organized crime, you'll see a video, and also your assignment is about RICO, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. Also, money laundering. Sometimes you hear the term a lot, but you don't necessarily know what it is. So let's say I have a car dealership, on a lot in the neighborhood, and you never see any cars move from the lot to someone's house, but someone comes and drops off money every day. I go do a bank deposit, and I'm putting in like $20,000 a day, but that $20,000 is coming from drug money, and what they're doing, they're laundering it or cleaning it, right? So you don't know where this money came from. You put it in the bank. If you take it back out, then obviously you can get different bills and things of that nature. So it's money laundering. Like I said, Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. Criminal provisions include 26 different types of felonies with fines up to $25,000 and 20 years in prison for each offense. Civil penalties include forfeiture and all damages. Classification of crime. So you have felonies, right? That's going to get you landed in jail. Not necessarily like the Twin Towers, but actually in prison. Serious crimes punishable by death or imprisonment over 1 year. Misdemeanors, less serious crimes, but still crimes, so you shouldn't do them just because they're just misdemeanors. Punishable by fine or confinement up to 1 year. So these are the defenses to criminal liability. So justifiable use of force, right? So it was justified that I defend myself, or justified that I do these things to protect my family. Necessity, right? Things are, it was necessity. Insanity, somebody's out of their mind, they don't remember the situation. It was a mistake, so sometimes, like I said in the video, you're driving, you hit somebody, you weren't drunk or anything like that, and it was just a mistake, and they happened to pass, which is unfortunate, but not necessarily should hold you criminally liable. Duress, so someone put a gun to your head and said, put a gun to somebody else's head, then that's something that you've done under duress. Or entrapment. I love Ferraris, and I go outside, and it's a Ferrari right there with the with the Falcon door up, and the keys are in, and it's running. They're trying to entrap me to jump in and take off with the car. Statute of limitations, right? Once you pass the statute of limitations on the crime, then you can't convict on that. A really interesting one that we saw on that. I know Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys. He was paying somebody, paying their bills and everything, all the way up until the statute of limitations. And as soon as the statute of limitations, bam, cut off payments, and let them know that there's nothing you can do because statute of limitations for what was being contested ended right there. And then immunity, if you have diplomatic immunity or just immunity because the police gave it to you because they want to get the bigger person in the chain, then you won't get convicted. So Fourth Amendment protection. So you have search warrants, right? So people come in, they want to come in your house, they they need a search warrant. Officer must have probable cause. Exceptions to warrant, right? So like if somebody comes up and they want to search they say, hey man, I need to search your car because your car smells like marijuana. Then that is probable cause. But if it doesn't smell like anything, there's no reason for them to to check the car or anything like that, then you can always decline. And then exceptions to warrant. Search and seizure in businesses, so warrant required in some cases. No warrant required for contaminated food or highly regulated liquor or gun businesses, because these are things that need to be resolved and rectified immediately. Want you to check out Case 6.1 U.S. vs. Moon. State officials can seize business records without a warrant if the owner agrees to the search. All right. Fifth Amendment protection, so you have due process of the law. Like everybody, here in the United States is entitled to due process. You have the opportunity to object, hearing before a neutral magistrate. Well, like a neutral judge, not somebody who hates your guts and is going to convict you no matter what, and instruct the jury to do so. Double jeopardy, you see that a lot. People who write books about, oh, this is how I killed so and so because they got off the crime. So they can't have double jeopardy. You can't say, oh, didn't work this time, let's go retry him. A person cannot be retried for the same offense in the same court. Civil action, however, is permitted, and I reference back to O.J. Simpson. Self-incrimination, like everybody says, I plead the Fifth, but they don't know why you plead the Fifth because it's the Fifth Amendment. Self-incrimination, the right to remain silent or not testify against yourself. In terms of Sixth and Eighth Amendments, right to a speedy trial, right? So I just saw yesterday in the news a guy, he was going to be on trial for murder. This is in Chicago. Things aren't going too great right there, and then they had to let him go because they did not adhere to his rights to have a speedy trial. The guy walks out. And I guess people were waiting on him. They say it was unrelated, and then he was gunned down and killed. You have the right to a jury trial, right to a public trial, and you have the right to confront witnesses. Cross-examine witnesses. You have the right to counsel, as probably if you're not a lawyer, you probably shouldn't do it. You should hire counsel. And prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment, right? It shouldn't be like, okay, well, you're gonna get 60 lashes on your back because you committed a crime, right? It's cruel and unusual punishment. Exclusionary rule and the Miranda rule. So evidence obtained in violation of constitutional procedures must be excluded, right? So if it was a legal search and seizure and they got some information, you know what? Too bad, gotta toss it out. Evidence derived from illegal evidence is the fruit of the poisonous tree, right? So, as soon as that happened, like they say, it's a slippery slope. People start planting evidence. Not that they, have ever stopped, but people start planting evidence and things of that nature. You have to be really cognizant and really careful with that. Deters police from misconduct, right? If they're going to be held, responsible, to these high standards, right? It deters them from misconduct. In case 6.2, Herring versus United States, evidence obtained during a search incident to a mistaken arrest is admissible, right? So it's a mistaken arrest. So we actually came in here, but we should have came to apartment B. But we found out that, he had, 10 pounds of cocaine. That doesn't mean that, that's not going to be seized. Miranda versus Arizona. So you can always wonder, well, why is it named the Miranda rule? Well, you look up Miranda versus Arizona, you'll find out. And all the way back in 1966, you want to inform suspects of his or her rights. Exceptions, public safety, coercion, illegally obtained evidence, right? Things of that nature, right? So there are always exceptions, but for the most part, you want to be Mirandaized, and Miranda versus Arizona in 1966 was the case. So that's where you get the Miranda rule from. Criminal process. So I'm just going to kind of slide through this, and you'll look at the arrows, and you can always go back on your PowerPoint that is loaded into Canvas. So you have arrest, then you get booked, and no, this is not a fun process. Initial appearance, grand jury preliminary hearing, charges are filed, arraignment, then you have your trial, possibly a plea bargain, and then possibly a guilty plea, possibly found innocent. You also, obviously have to, have guidelines in terms of sentencing. So in 2005, the Supreme Court changed the guidelines from mandatory to advisory. 2009, the court held sentencing judge cannot presume that a sentence without guidelines is reasonable, right? You have to have some type of guidelines. And that's it for Chapter 6. So be sure to, like I always say, if you're at the end of this video, you watch the whole video. Be sure to watch the other supplemental videos. Be sure to take your quiz. And anything else that's available for the 6th module within the class. So for that's it for today. As always, I want you guys to have a good day and great week. If you have any questions, please be sure to email me, and that'll do it for Chapter 6. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.